Hello and welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books. And Minnie just off camera, being cute and, if I'm being honest, a bit menacing. Today, on this Sunday evening, I'm filming this Sunday evening and I'm really hoping I can get this out Sunday evening. It's my October reading wrap up. So I have read 11 books this month and I'm here to tell you about them. But first, the stats. So as I said, I've read 11 books this month. Of that, 4 were audio and 4 were books that I owned, which amounts for 36% of my reading, both not together. 2 of the books were library books, which is 18% of my reading for this month, and 1 book was a proof copy or a book sent from the publisher, which was 10% of the reading for this month. So if we look at the stats for the year so far, so 2022, I've read 105 books so far this year, guys, and 30 of those have been library books, which is 29% of my reading. 35 of those have been audiobooks, which is 33% of my reading, a good nice third. 32 of those have been books that I've owned, which is 30% of my reading, and 7 of those have been proofs, which is 7% of my reading. So yeah, I mean, I think I said this at the beginning of each video that I do this, but my big plan was to read more library books this year, and I certainly have been doing that. I mean, to have sort of like almost a third of my reading at library books, delighted about that and delighted to keep doing it. So yeah, but let's get chatting about the books. So the first book I read in October was Undoctored by Adam Kay. Adam Kay is the author of one of my favourite books, This Is Going to Hurt. You just made me a cup of tea without me even asking. I hit the jackpot, guys. Yeah, Adam Kay is the author of one of my favourite books, This Is Going to Hurt, which is a collation of Adam Kay's diaries from when he was a junior doctor. This came out many years ago. I work in the NHS, so it's sort of like I had a vested interest in this type of thing anyway. And I think it's a really important book of our time to read what sort of is happening in the health service and what junior doctors and all sorts is going on. And then going into this, I was sort of, embarrassingly, not really expecting much. I think because the last Adam Kay book I read was a children's book, and it was just full of like poo and pus and wee and blood jokes, I wasn't really up for it. But this I really enjoyed. So this follows on basically from when Adam has quit the profession. There she is. And what it's like for him trying to get into writing, which is what he does now for sitcoms and things like that. And it follows a lot about his relationships with his parents and his relationships with his now husband, I think. It also focuses on the fact that he was previously married to a woman, and the fact that he's always believed that he is gay, but he sort of married a woman because that's what he thought he should do. And yeah, lots of different aspects of his life, and I really enjoyed it. He's got a real good sort of turn of phrase, and he's very entertaining. What I will say is that these books, obviously, they come with a trigger warning for sort of like death and illness, and in this case rape as well, so be aware of that. But yeah, I enjoyed this, not as much as This Is Going to Hurt. That's one of my favourite books, but I found it enjoyable. Then next up, actually David's here with his headphones on. I don't know if he can hear me. You know, I read Paper Girls, Volume 1, by Brian Vaughan, and I read that because David and I were desperate to watch the TV series. We still haven't watched it, and I finished it on the 7th of...
No, I didn't realise you'd finished it.
Yeah, I read it on the 7th of October.
Oh, okay, cool.
So we need to watch that. So the whole book, that's it, you can pop your headphone back on now.
Okay.
So yeah, the whole reason I was keen to read this because David had read Paper Girls. I'd read it many, many years ago and couldn't really remember anything of it, but I really enjoyed it. I haven't seen Stranger Things, but I got a very sort of like, having watched, having basically sat in here whilst David was watching Stranger Things, I got a very sort of Stranger Things vibe from it. And I think it's going to be a great TV series. I love all the sort of like female characters in there and everything. I think it's going to be great. I was a bit concerned that maybe it was going to be a bit scary. But when I put that on Instagram, a lot of people got back to me and said, no, the series isn't scary at all. It's a really, really good adaptation, but it's not of the first volume. It's of like many volumes, and nobody's picked it up for a second series yet, so they're not quite sure like what's going to happen with it. But yeah, I'm keen to watch it. I enjoyed it. Yeah, would recommend. Next up is, well, 2 books back to back, both by Melissa Hawthorne. I think I'll actually talk about them as a twosome. So the first one was called By Ash, Oak and Thorn, and the second one was called By Rowan and Yew. Now I bought By Rowan and Yew. I haven't got them here, which is a shame, but I've lent them to my sister because I raved about them so much afterwards. So I bought By Rowan and Yew first in Waterstones. The front cover is just the most beautifully autumnal thing I've ever seen. Like, mushrooms and autumn leaves and just gorgeousness. And then when I hauled it, a lot of people said, oh, it's actually a duology, so you're probably best to read the first one. So I went ahead and got by Ash Oak and Thorn as well. So I read those back to back. I gave by Ash Oak and Thorn 5 stars, and I gave by Rowan and Yew 4 stars. And I just loved them. I just thought they were absolutely fantastic. They are nature writing. Melissa Hawthorne is a nature writer. This is middle grade writing, following Half-Foots. I think they're called Half-Foots. I haven't got the book here, so I can't check, but let me have a look at my Instagram, because I'm sure I wrote it on there. I'm sure. Hidden Folk. Half-Foots is Lord of the Rings, isn't it? Hidden Folk. So they're sort of like magical little beings as big as your hand that live within and interact with nature. And it's sort of like the nature that I experienced as a child. There's a lot of like, they wear like little acorn caps, like made out of acorn, the bit that connects the acorn to the tree, like caps made out of that, and clothes made out of sort of like leaves and stuff they found around, and the things that they eat are really like conker pancakes and sort of things like that, and they live in little tents made out of leaves to keep the rain out, and just like all sorts of stuff that I really sort of envisaged in my childhood. I remember sort of like leaving out a conker, thinking that some little magical pixie or someone was going to come and collect it and make something out of it. And yeah, it was just really heartwarming, sort of like a balm of beautiful writing and like cozy, really nice sort of like gentle adventure stuff. And it follows a real nice thread of adventure. Like they're at this one place, and then they know they have to get to the next place, and then they have to do that, and all of this lovely nature writing's coming in together, and I just adored it. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And like I said, I gave the first one 5 stars and the second one 4 stars, but that's such high rate. Like 4 stars is a fucking good rating from me, guys. Absolutely beautiful duology, and like I said, like aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds, middle grade book, but for all of them. I've definitely got a lot of comfort from those books this month. It's been lovely to read them, and beautiful, and just lovely, just really lovely. I can't stop saying lovely. Next up was an audiobook by Graham Norton called Forever Home. This is Graham Norton's 4th book, probably my 2nd favourite out of all of Graham's books. The Keeper's my number 1 favourite, if you're wondering. And yeah, I just think if you're into sort of like family-based sagas with like a mystery twist, like based in Ireland, which they're all sort of like my bag in terms of reading, then like Graham Norton is definitely the author for you, and you should definitely check out some of his stuff. This one really had a sort of Marion Keyes feel to it as well. I think the family setting and getting to know all of the family, I'll tell you a little bit about the plot. So it's about a woman who has married, who is a second marriage, and she's with a guy. Actually, they might not be married. I don't think they are married. Who is very unwell with dementia, and the house that she's lived in with him, for a long time, is sort of been taken away from her by his kids and sold on. And you're looking at his kids' relationship with their father and her relationship with the father, and there's obviously something that's happened in the past which is now coming back. And I don't really want to say more than that, because I really like the way it unfurled. And yeah, like I said, there's a sort of like real Marion Keyes feel about this one. I think it was because there was such a focus on family ties. The main protagonist and her mother are a big sort of like duo in this book, and I really enjoyed hearing their relationship and the way they spoke to one another and stuff. But yeah, I really thought it was great fun, great sort of, I would say page turner, but I listened to it on audio. Graham narrates them on audio, which is really good as well. He's very good at the accents and putting on voices and things like that. And yeah, just sort of comforting, great for this time of year. And like I said, my 2nd favourite out of all of Graham's books so far. The order that I would put them in: The Keeper's number 1, then Forever Home number 2, Holding I think number 3, and this will show the number 4 because I can't remember the name of it, but it's got something to do with a car. I can't remember the name of it, but that's how I've enjoyed it. But very cosy reading, enjoying. Then next up, another audiobook. This was very good. This was a little 30-minute slip of a thing, and this is a short story by Philip Pullman called The Collectors. I listened to the audiobook of it, which is narrated by Bill Nighy, which by the way, was amazing. And I went into this not knowing anything about it, whether it was related to His Dark Materials or anything. Turns out it was related to His Dark Materials, and it was creepy and chilling and really, really great. And it's about art collection, and it has links to Mrs. Coulter and the Golden Monkey. And yeah, I really, really, I listened to the whole thing whilst cooking dinner one night, and I was like, fuck, I could have gone back and listened to that again. I really, really thought it was great. If you're a big His Dark Materials fan like I am, pumped for the third book, for the third series, by the way, then this is a great sort of accompaniment. But I think Philip Pullman's quite good at that, isn't he? Like Serpentine, that was another one that I read, although a lot of people don't like the Book of Dust books, which I don't mind so much. But yeah, this is a great accompaniment to the His Dark Materials, and yeah, the audiobook by Bill Nye was brilliant. Next up is a book that I've actually got here, and that's Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. This is a short little novella. It's only 167 pages, I remember reading, about two kids at school and the life altering and changing bullying that they are going through. It's about a boy and a girl, and they're both bullied so traumatically, and it's really, really hard to read, and it actually sort of like the last sort of pages are very, very traumatic, and the sort of act of bullying goes beyond well, just beyond anything you think children are capable of, really. And both of these people are bullied, and they make a friendship through writing letters to one another, and the sort of hopefulness in those letters, and neither of them have really had a friend before, and what that sort of like feels like for them. And then mixed up with like the violence, because it's not just sort of like nasty comments, it's really awful, the violence that they're both at the hands to, and then towards the end the sexual harassment that that they both face as well. It was just awful, but it really does lead up to one of the most cinematic sort of endings I have ever read in a book. So it was really, really hard to get there, but I'll read you like, because there's this one particular really powerful paragraph. It's a big paragraph, but I'll just read to you a few lines from it, because it's just, like I said, so cinematic. The scene before me was one I'd never ever dreamed of. In the cold December air, all the leaves, thousands upon thousands of them, flashed against the sky drenched in gold. Every leaf rang with its own light, and all the light poured into me without end. I inhaled and surrendered to the flow. The distance between 1 second and the next felt stretched out by the hands of some enormous being. I forgot to breathe, forgot to blink, and I let myself sink into the fragrant black bark of the trees. I mean, I could go on. I could feel the skin against the softest parts of my body. With the tips of my fingers, I caught the drops of light falling through the gaps in the humming leaves and even entered them. It was noon, but the sun was out of sight. Everything glowed on its own. It goes on, but yeah, I mean, that was amazing and beautiful. So yeah, a difficult read, a real difficult read, but that sort of like end section, well, I've just read it to you. You know how I feel about it. Next up was a library book, which was Shrines of Gaiety by Kate Atkinson. Love Kate Atkinson. She's written another of my favourite books, Life After Life. And I also really, really love Behind the Scenes at the Museum. I'm definitely due a reread of Behind the Scenes at the Museum, because I've reread Life After Life a number of times, but never revisited Behind the Scenes at the Museum. Maybe I'll do that on audiobook. Maybe I will. But the last Kate Atkinson book I read, I think it's called Transcription, the one with the flamingo on the front, wasn't that enamoured by. We read it for book club, and none of us really loved it that much. But this I really enjoyed. So this is set in 1926, and it's sort of like set in amongst sort of like gangsters in London and nightclubs, and we're following one particular character who's just come out of prison, and she owns with her family, owns a sort of like string of nightclubs, and she's running them with her children and things like that. And then we're following somebody who is looking into the disappearance of two young girls who have run away to London to become stars of the stage. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. The feel of it was really sort of like opulent and like almost a bit sort of Gatsby-esque in terms of like the parties and things like that. But one thing I will say about it, and like I said, I really enjoyed it, I just feel like there was a lot of characters in there, a lot of main characters that we're following. As I mentioned, we've got the woman who is out of prison and running all of these clubs, and her children, and she's got a number of children. And then we're following a woman who's looking into the disappearance of these two young girls, and then she's being helped out by a police officer, and there's also some corrupt police officers which we're also following. So it really was a lot of people to follow, and I feel like I either could have done with a little bit more book and got to know them all a little bit better, or maybe snipped a few of those characters down to sort of like more minor characters, because I would have liked more time with some of the bigger players in the story. And like I said, there was loads. But yeah, a real good read, and I enjoyed it a lot. Next up was Spark. From one that I really enjoyed to one that I didn't really enjoy. Spark by Naoki Matayoshi. I started this a few months ago and then didn't get around to finishing it. I was halfway through and I thought, I'm just going to finish that just so it's done. So I've been forever sort of intrigued of the personalities of stand-up comedians and sort of how they're able to be so on all the time, and then the sort of like the moments. So like I imagine like doing I once upon a time wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and I did a little bit at university, but I think self-doubt got in the way there. And what's always astonished me with stand-up comedians is how they're able to sort of like perform these routines and have people howling and laughing and being really high, and then literally like having to go back to a hotel on your own and just being really dark. Now, this looks into a type of comedy called Manzai, which is not my type of comedy. It's double act, a lot of sort of like miscommunication and double speak, and it's not for me at all. Like I didn't enjoy the comedy side of things, so I was going to struggle there anyway. And then the two people we're following have got really sort of like dark sides of their personality, which I also didn't enjoy. And I just think it was a bit silly and a bit daft for me, like mixed up with, so like silly and daft mixed up with sort of like dark personalities. It was just never going to happen for me. However, it is a Netflix series, so a lot of people out there do like it, but it just wasn't for I. Next up was one I actually listened to on audiobook, but I've got the book here because now I've listened to it on audiobook, I will pass this on. And it's The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. Now, this is one of those unusual situations where the build-up of this was so good and so satisfying that the actual sort of revelation at the end didn't live up to the build-up of it. A little bit like Christmas, some might say. No, not I would never say that. But yeah, so this is a book set in the 70s and the 90s about a group of men who were looking after a lighthouse, we're going to call it a lamp house then, and their disappearance. They disappeared in the 70s without trace, and they've left wives on the shore, and we are now those wives are being interviewed by a journalist about what happened then and what could have potentially happened. The case is closed. And yeah, I thought the audio of this was really good. It was Tom Burke that did the men's voice, you know, Tom Burke from he plays Cormoran Strike in the Cormoran Strike series. But yeah, it was really well performed. But like I said, the sort of like payoff at the end, I was a bit like, oh, I was just enjoying being sort of like swept up in it, to be honest. So yeah, one of those sort of like a bit like a sort of true crime podcast, you know, like when you listen to a true crime podcast, you're thinking how good everything is, and then once it's actually like the wrap up, it's almost sort of like unresolved. This does get resolved, but I was like, oh, that was over a bit quick. I could have done with it being dragged out a little bit more. So there we go. And then the last book, which I've literally finished today, and I'm about to discuss this for Patreon Book Club in less than half hour, and that's Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. Now I always try and make sure I've spoken about the book in book club before I wrap it up, so I'm pleased that I'm filming this now so I can do this. So yeah, this was the book that we picked for Women with Powers, and we are following Jessamine here, who is has been brought up in the US by Malaysian parents and has now moved back to Malaysia with her parents, and she is hearing voices in her head, and those voices are the voice of her grandmother, Ma, who has a lot to do with a deity who's called the Blackwater Sister. This is sort of like all tied up in temples, and there's a sort of like scandal going on with some very badly mistreated labourers, and there's gangsters involved and stuff like that. I really enjoyed Jessamine and her point of view. I found the point of view of being brought up in one country and then returning home to another country that you're probably not familiar as it being home. I found that really interesting. Jessamine's also queer and her parents are not aware of that, so I was interested and troubled by the way in which Jessamine was treating her girlfriend, because I haven't been in a situation where my parents aren't aware of my sexuality and a relationship that I'm having that they're not aware of that's my sexuality, so her trying to cover that up with her parents while still maintaining a relationship, sort of like long distance with her girlfriend, I found that interesting. But yeah, the action parts of this, and there is quite a lot of action in this, I sometimes felt lost because I felt like it happened very quickly and I was like, oh god, I'm not quite sure what had happened there. But yeah, the actual sort of like the personalities and the character development I enjoyed, but yeah, the action I don't feel like was written particularly well. But yeah, looking forward to discussing this in half an hour. So there we go, those are the 11 books that I read in the month of October. Would love to hear if you have read any of these books, would love to hear what you read in October, and I'll see you all again soon for another booktube video. For my November TBR actually on Tuesday. I'll see you then. Hopefully I'll get this up on Sunday, hopefully. Bye!